You're listening to episode 265 of the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast, where we're going to be talking about what is customer acquisition cost and why does it matter for your online business. Welcome to the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast, where being a badass has less to do with what you wear and what music you listen to, and everything to do with whether you've got the thriving online business of your dreams. I'm your renegade thinking Harvard Law grad turned online entrepreneur host, Bobby Klink. In my years building my thriving business, the most important lesson I've learned is that being a badass online marketer isn't about secret strategies or ninja tactics. It's about doing the basic stuff right and showing the F up. So each week here on the show, you'll get clear, easy to execute guidance on how to build your online business and a swift kick in the ass or two to make sure you're getting it done. Hey there, I am your host, Bobby Klink, and I am excited for today's episode. Now, today's episode is kind of a continuation of last Thursday's episode. So last Thursday, we addressed what is customer lifetime value. That was episode 263. And in a lot of ways, customer lifetime value and customer acquisition cost, which we're talking about today, are the most important metrics in your business. If your customer lifetime value is more than your customer acquisition cost, then you've got a profitable model. Now, again, you have to have enough sales for that excess to cover things like, overhead expenses, et cetera. But it is an important idea. And so last week we talked about customer lifetime value, which is what is the total value on average of one of your customers? So it is a metric, a way to look and say, hey, if we get someone and get them to buy, on average, they'll be worth $500 to us. Let's just say that's your number. Then you know that, okay? And so once you know that, then the question is, okay, what does it cost us to get each one of those customers? And so customer acquisition cost is that other side. And customer acquisition cost, what we're talking about and what it is the way to think about it is kind of the average. So you're taking the costs for sales and marketing efforts, like the front end stuff, to get people aware of your content, your brand, to get them aware of your solution, to get them all of those things all the way through to get them to lead and then get them to buy. So all of those costs that are kind of included there, from the first moment they might become aware of you to the point that they become a buyer, would get put into the cost part of customer acquisition cost, and then you divide that by the total number of customers. So if your total costs for all things sales and marketing in your business in a year was $100,000, and you got 1,000 new customers during that time period, your customer acquisition cost would be $100. And if you had a customer lifetime value of $500, you'd say, woohoo, great. I am making money here because it cost me $100 and I make $500. So that means there's a $400 difference, which effectively is the gross kind of profit for the product, which can then be used to cover overhead expenses. So that's a way to look at it. Now, that kind of simplifies the process and makes it seem way simpler than it actually is. And I want you to understand, with customer acquisition cost, oftentimes, what you need to do is you need to understand the idea behind it and the complexity, but we're not going to be able to do the complex calculations. And let me explain what that means. So at a simple level, you could look at customer acquisition costs and simply calculate things like, in a paid advertising context, the direct cost. So I spent $10,000 on Facebook ads and I got 100 or I got 1,000 customers, right? So that would be very simple. I say, how much did I spend on the ads? And then how much how many customers did I get? You do the division and you say, hey, boom, the cost to acquire is that. And you'll often see that number in reporting from paid ads. They'll often say a CPA, cost per acquisition. And so that's reporting that. And it's a kind of a very rudimentary sense of customer acquisition costs because it accounts for the direct spend on ads. Now, you could go, but let me stop before I go kind of and talk about what you could go deeper. The problem with that is that doesn't account for the total costs involved, because obviously someone created and managed those ads. And there were probably things beyond the ads that actually helped to acquire the customer. So maybe they became a lead, and then there was email marketing nurturing, there was funnels, there was other content, and all of that stuff also nurtured people to get them to buy. So this is kind of where it gets more complicated and murky. But let's talk about the top level, especially if you're doing paid advertising. One thing that's an obvious addition to the actual money spent on the actual advertising platform and ad dollars would be the direct costs of managing those ads. So if you have someone out, like a team doing it, and they charge you a certain amount per month, that's simple. You just add it to that. And hopefully, if you have a team doing it, they're doing most of the work. And so you're not having to do much of the actual kind of advertising management in-house. Now, if you don't have people outside doing it, you're probably spending time and effort, either yours or other people's on your team, to do this work. And it's probably not your entire time. So you're probably spending only a piece of your time, or you have an employee who's only spending part of their time doing this. And so what you have to do there is kind of do what's called an allocation and say, okay, well, I paid this employee $5,000 per month. And let's just say 20% of their time is spent managing Facebook ads. Okay, that's simple math then. 5,000 times 20%, that'd be $1,000. So it's, again, you would just add that to the cost. So you can see how you kind of would build this up over time. Now, for paid employees, it's easy. If you don't actually pay yourself a consistent salary, your time is kind of a mix, but you should put a value on it. You should say, okay, well, my time is worth X dollars and I spent this much time on it. So here's an approximation of the cost. So that's kind of the salaries and also outside consultants. So teams like that. But you also want to think about software, and hopefully software isn't a big piece, but if there's software that is only there, that you only need as part of the sales and marketing process. So if you, for example, had software simply to create sales pages. I think of Instapage forever, and maybe they've expanded, but at some point we had Instapage. It cost us $200 a month, and the only thing we would use it for were sales pages. So obviously, that's a cost that would get added into a cost to acquire, just because that's clearly something that we use only for this front-end acquisition. You might have a similar type of software out there. You might have a CRM software, which is all about contact on the front end. If you have that kind of software, you'd want to add that into the till. Beyond that, you would have to think about, are there other overhead costs that are associated with the sales and marketing team? And this could be just about anything. In our case, our types of businesses, this isn't likely to be there. Now, you're not going to probably have an office space. So you probably don't have office space allocatable to the sales and marketing team. You probably don't have computer or equipment that is allocatable to the sales and marketing team. But you might have subscriptions and things. You might think of these as software. But Canva, for example. Canva is probably primarily a sales and marketing tool for you. So you would kind of add that cost in. And this is kind of how you add up all the costs. And so what you can do is just kind of add all of your marketing and sales costs and then divide them by the total sales. And that will give you your average cost to acquire a customer. So your customer acquisition cost. And as long as that's lower than the customer lifetime value, you're in good shape. You should be making money. Now, again, with the caveat, you have to make sure you're selling enough so that the excess, there's enough of it to pay for all the other things. Now that we've talked about that, I want to get a bit more kind of like nuanced. And this is where we're really going to be getting a bit more theoretical, because I want you to understand that the chances of us being able to do this are going to be harder. But you also want to try to think about, what is my cost to acquire a customer, and calculate those for different channels. And what I mean by that is, if you're spending, let's just say that you're creating content and that you're making a big SEO push. Okay. So you want to figure out how much of your time, effort, money, employee time, et cetera, is devoted to that effort. And then try, if you can, to figure out how many customers come from that channel. Now, you can't always do this, but if you could, you would want to kind of do that and figure out, okay, so, and calculate out what the cost is to acquire a customer from search engine optimization content work, okay? Then you would want to do a similar calculation for, let's just say, social media engagement. Say you might want to compare how does your time, effort, money, et cetera, for Facebook compare to LinkedIn, and say, okay, well, here's the time we're spending on each. Here's the money for employees to create this stuff. And then how many customers am I getting from each? And you could look at that and do a comparison between those channels. And then you also would then compare that to your content marketing SEO push and say, okay, well, how much is that? And then you would also then maybe compare it to the Facebook ads and say, okay, what does that do? And when you're doing this, obviously you have to do more of this allocation work where it's not all the costs. It's okay. What are the costs for content marketing and SEO? What are the costs for this social channel? What are the costs for this social channel? What are the costs for paid ads? But the reason you want to do that, if you can get this data, and again, it won't be perfect because tracking is hard, but if you could, it'll give you insights. So for example, if you discovered that, hey, let's just talk about like comparing between two social media platforms. It cost us $20 to acquire a customer via Facebook and $150 to acquire a customer on average via LinkedIn. Unless you can also look and say that the LinkedIn customers are worth a lot more, you need to ask yourself, could you make more money by spending less time on LinkedIn and more time on Facebook? And again, it might not be the case. It might be that at Facebook, you've kind of like maxed out what you can do, but it could be that you decide, well, if my team and I spent 5 hours less on LinkedIn and spent that time on Facebook, we actually think we could still continue to have, that same difference. See, this is where you do this as a comparison and make your investments the right way. It'll be easiest to do between those kinds of like to like, social media campaign to social media campaign, or two different advertising campaigns, two different advertising channels. But you can try to do it broader, say SEO versus paid ads. But the problem there is that oftentimes it's not like you can simply take money or time out of one and invest in another. But if you can, you might decide that's worthwhile. So this is how customer acquisition cost comes in. And again, I wanted to get you to understand the general concept, but then understand how if you just start looking at it, and even if it's only conceptual, but start to do as much as you can to figure out how much does it cost you to acquire a customer via the different channels and platforms that you're using, and then make the decision to kind of readjust your investments and time, that can actually make a big difference in your business. I mean, that's what like a big business in their marketing plan would do. And you should be thinking that way as you're building things out in your business. So that's it for this episode. This is the last episode of the podcast for 2021. I hope you had a wonderful year, and I hope that 2022 is prosperous for you as well. We will be back again next week with more episodes. I will see you then. That's it for this episode of the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast. Make sure to tune in next time. And in the meantime, go out and build the badass business of your dreams.